For more than 100 years, the automotive industry appeared to have only one future. Germany perfected engineering. Japan mastered efficiency. America transformed the automobile into one of the greatest industrial achievements in modern history. Together, they built companies that survived wars, financial crises, oil shocks, and technological revolutions. Their dominance seemed absolute. But what if that era is already coming to an end? What if the next chapter in automotive history wasn't written inside the factories of Detroit, the engineering centers of Stuttgart, or the production lines of Tokyo? What if it began inside a modest battery workshop in southern China? And what if the world's greatest automakers didn't lose their advantage because they stopped innovating, but because someone else changed the rules of the game entirely? For generations, the global automotive industry revolved around three industrial powerhouses. Germany earned worldwide admiration for engineering precision. Japan became the benchmark for quality, reliability, and manufacturing excellence. Across the Atlantic, the United States pioneered mass production, creating an industry that reshaped economies and transformed the way people lived. Together, these nations produced brands that became household names across the globe. Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Volkswagen, Toyota, Honda, Ford, Porsche. These companies were never simply manufacturers of automobiles. They became symbols of national identity, technological achievement, and industrial power. Millions of families depended on them for their livelihoods. Entire cities flourished because of their factories. Governments regarded them as strategic industries. For decades, it seemed impossible to imagine a future in which these giants would no longer dominate the global market. After all, how could anyone challenge companies that had spent more than a century refining every aspect of the automobile? Their experience was unmatched. Their engineering was legendary. Their supply chains stretched across continents. Their financial resources dwarfed those of nearly every potential competitor. To many observers, their leadership appeared permanent. History, however, rarely rewards those who believe they are untouchable. Industries evolve. Technology changes. New ideas emerge. And every so often, a challenger appears from the place nobody expected. During the early years of the 21st century, subtle warning signs began appearing across the automotive world. At first, they attracted little attention. A disappointing earnings report, a shrinking profit margin, a factory reducing production. Individually, none of these developments seemed unusual. Economic slowdowns had happened before. Competition had always existed. The industry had survived countless crises. But this time, something was different. As the years passed, isolated setbacks became a pattern. Luxury manufacturers reported declining profits. Companies that had enjoyed decades of steady growth suddenly faced increasing uncertainty. Large-scale restructuring became unavoidable. Factories closed. Production slowed. Thousands of jobs disappeared. Some of the world's most respected automakers found themselves confronting challenges they had not anticipated only a few years earlier. Executives searched for explanations. Analysts examined market trends. Governments began asking difficult questions. Then an unexpected answer kept appearing. Not once, not twice, but almost everywhere. BYD. Only a few years earlier, the name meant little to most people outside China. It wasn't associated with luxury automobiles. It wasn't known for racing heritage. It had no century-old legacy. In fact, it wasn't originally recognized as a car company at all. Its expertise lay elsewhere. Rechargeable batteries. A product so ordinary that few consumers ever stopped to consider who manufactured them. Yet hidden inside those batteries was a technological expertise that would eventually become one of the company's greatest strengths. At the time, almost nobody saw it coming. The established automotive industry remained focused on engines, transmissions, fuel economy, and traditional manufacturing. Electric vehicles were often regarded as an uncertain experiment rather than the future of transportation. Even many experienced executives believed the transition would take decades. Some doubted it would ever happen on a meaningful scale. Among those skeptical voices was Elon Musk, who once laughed when asked whether BYD could become a serious competitor to Tesla. At that moment, the idea seemed almost unbelievable. How could a battery manufacturer compete with companies that had spent generations mastering the automobile? How could it challenge businesses worth hundreds of billions of dollars? How could it possibly disrupt an industry that had defined modern transportation for more than a century? Time, however, has a remarkable way of changing perspectives. The company once dismissed by critics gradually expanded beyond China's borders. Its electric vehicles appeared in one market after another. Production accelerated. Sales climbed. Factories multiplied. Within only a few years, BYD had become one of the largest manufacturers of electrified vehicles in the world. The laughter faded. The questions became far more serious. Success on that scale never happens by accident. Behind every company that seems to rise overnight lies years of preparation, countless difficult decisions, and a vision that few people recognized while it was taking shape. Which raises an even more fascinating question. Did BYD simply build better electric vehicles? Or had it discovered a completely different way of competing? The answer began to reveal itself far beyond China's borders. Southeast Asia became one of the first regions where the balance started to shift. For decades, countries such as Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore had been strongholds of Japanese manufacturers. Toyota, Honda, Mazda, Mitsubishi, Nissan. Their presence shaped local industries and consumer expectations for generations. Then something remarkable happened. Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers began gaining ground at a speed few analysts had predicted. Market shares changed. Consumer preferences evolved. Investment plans were rewritten. Manufacturers that once appeared unshakable suddenly found themselves defending positions they had held for decades. The same trend soon appeared elsewhere. Europe, long regarded as the heart of automotive engineering, began witnessing the steady rise of Chinese electric vehicle brands. Competition intensified. Established manufacturers faced increasing pressure to adapt to a rapidly changing market. Meanwhile, new factories emerged in countries far beyond China, including Brazil, where former automotive facilities found new life under different ownership. One by one, markets that had long belonged to familiar names became increasingly competitive. Only the United States remained largely beyond BYD's reach, with trade restrictions and national security concerns limiting its access. Yet outside that market, the company's international expansion continued to accelerate. By now, it had become clear that this was no ordinary business success story. It represented a shift in industrial competition unlike anything the automotive industry had experienced in generations. But one mystery still remained. How could a company that began by manufacturing rechargeable batteries challenge corporations that had spent more than a century perfecting the automobile? The answer was not hidden inside a luxury showroom. Nor did it begin with a revolutionary car. It began with one engineer, one ambitious idea, and a willingness to see the future long before the rest of the world believed it was possible. The engineer was Wang Chuanfu. Years before the world knew the name BYD, before governments debated Chinese electric vehicles, before Europe's automotive giants realized a new challenger was rising in the East, one engineer had already reached a conclusion that almost everyone else believed was impossible. He wasn't trying to build the world's fastest car. He wasn't trying to imitate Mercedes-Benz, Toyota, or Ford. He believed the future of the automobile would not be decided by the engine. It would be decided by the battery. And if he was right, then the companies that had ruled the automotive world for more than a century were preparing for the wrong war. At the time, the idea sounded absurd. The world's largest automakers employed hundreds of thousands of engineers. They possessed factories spread across continents, supply chains refined over generations, and more than 100 years of experience building automobiles. Wang had none of that. No automotive empire. No famous brand. No racing heritage. No century-old engineering tradition. What he had was a small battery company in Shenzhen, and a conviction so radical that even many of his own investors would eventually try to stop him. Because Wang wasn't trying to compete with the existing car industry. He was trying to build the industry that would replace it. And the most astonishing part? While much of the world laughed at the idea, he had already begun laying the foundations for a company that would eventually force some of the most powerful automakers on Earth onto the defensive. Unlike many of the business titans who shaped the modern automotive industry, Wang did not inherit an industrial empire. He wasn't backed by generations of wealth. He didn't have the resources of Detroit's manufacturing giants or Germany's legendary engineering firms. What he possessed instead was something far more dangerous: an extraordinary ability to recognize where technology was heading long before the rest of the world. Born into modest circumstances, Wang developed an early fascination with engineering and science. Those who worked alongside him often described him as intensely analytical, a man who believed every complex problem could eventually be solved through patience, experimentation, and relentless improvement. While many entrepreneurs chased quick profits, Wang became obsessed with understanding technology at its most fundamental level. He wasn't interested in following industries. He wanted to understand what would transform them. That opportunity arrived during the mid-1990s. Portable electronics were spreading rapidly across the world. Mobile phones, laptop computers, and countless electronic devices depended on one critical component: rechargeable batteries. Most people barely noticed them. Consumers cared about the phone, the computer, the brand. Almost nobody thought about the battery hidden inside. Wang saw something entirely different. He believed whoever mastered battery technology would one day possess an advantage extending far beyond consumer electronics. Acting on that conviction, he founded BYD in Shenzhen in 1995 with approximately $40,000 borrowed from relatives and a small team determined to challenge much larger competitors. At the time, Shenzhen itself symbolized China's remarkable industrial transformation. Factories were multiplying. Technology companies were emerging. Innovation was accelerating. It became the perfect environment for an ambitious young engineer. The early years were anything but easy. BYD competed against established Japanese battery manufacturers whose experience and reputation appeared almost impossible to challenge. Most observers expected the small Chinese startup to disappear within a few years. Instead, it grew. Rather than relying solely on expensive automation, BYD combined engineering expertise with highly efficient manufacturing methods, allowing it to produce quality batteries at increasingly competitive costs. Customers began noticing. Orders increased. The company expanded steadily. Within only a few years, some of the world's largest electronics manufacturers, including Motorola and Nokia, were purchasing batteries produced by BYD. For a business founded with borrowed money, it represented extraordinary progress. By the early 2000s, BYD had become one of the world's leading rechargeable battery manufacturers. For most entrepreneurs, reaching the top of an industry would have been the destination. For Wang, it was merely the beginning. In 2003, he made a decision that stunned investors. Instead of strengthening his already successful battery business, Wang purchased a struggling state-owned automobile manufacturer. To financial markets, the move appeared baffling. What did a battery company know about designing cars? The automotive industry demanded enormous investment, years of engineering expertise, global supply chains, complex safety testing, and manufacturing capabilities built over decades. History offered countless examples of companies that had failed after entering the automobile business. Many investors feared BYD would become another one of them. The company's share price fell sharply. Criticism spread through business circles. Some commentators described the acquisition as reckless. Others dismissed it as the ambitious fantasy of an engineer who underestimated the complexity of building automobiles. Ironically, one detail fueled the skepticism even further. Wang himself did not even possess a driving license when BYD entered the automotive business. To critics, it became the perfect symbol of misplaced confidence. How could someone who barely drove cars hope to build them? The jokes spread quickly. But Wang remained remarkably calm. Because everyone else believed they understood the question. They thought BYD was trying to compete with Toyota, Mercedes-Benz, Volkswagen, Ford. They were wrong. Wang wasn't trying to build a better version of yesterday's automobile. He was preparing for tomorrow's. To most manufacturers, the heart of a vehicle was still its engine. To Wang, the future belonged somewhere else. He believed batteries, not engines, would ultimately determine who led the next generation of transportation. If electric vehicles became the future, then the company controlling battery technology would possess an advantage few competitors could match. It was a simple idea. But simple ideas often prove to be the most revolutionary. The challenge was convincing the rest of the world. For years, that seemed impossible. BYD's early automobiles attracted little international attention. Many designs failed to impress critics. Outside China, the company remained largely unknown. Meanwhile, established manufacturers continued investing heavily in traditional vehicles, confident that their experience would preserve their leadership. Even as electric vehicles gradually gained attention, most industry observers focused almost entirely on one company, Tesla. It dominated headlines, captured investor imagination, and became the symbol of the electric revolution. Far from the spotlight, BYD quietly continued building something very different. Its executives rarely chased publicity. Instead, they invested in engineering, manufacturing, research, and perhaps most importantly, control. While many automakers relied on hundreds of independent suppliers for batteries, electronics, motors, software, semiconductors, and countless other components, BYD pursued a dramatically different strategy. Whenever possible, it would build those critical technologies itself. Batteries, electric motors, power electronics, semiconductors, software systems. Instead of depending on outside suppliers, BYD steadily expanded its ability to manufacture many of the technologies powering its vehicles. The strategy demanded enormous investment. It required patience. It increased short-term costs. Many questioned whether such an approach made financial sense. Why manufacture components internally when specialized suppliers already existed? Why assume greater responsibility when competitors were outsourcing more than ever? At the time, those questions seemed reasonable. The answer would not become obvious immediately. It would emerge only when an unexpected global crisis exposed just how vulnerable the world's automotive supply chains had become. What appeared to be an expensive strategy would soon become one of BYD's greatest competitive advantages. And while much of the automotive industry struggled to secure the parts needed to keep assembly lines moving, one company found itself better prepared than almost anyone had imagined. The gamble that once looked reckless was about to become a blueprint. The blueprint had never been about building another car. It was about building something far more valuable: control. While much of the automotive industry spent decades perfecting the art of assembling vehicles, Wang Chuanfu was quietly asking a different question. What if the companies that supplied the industry eventually became just as important as the companies that sold the cars? It was a question few executives were asking, and even fewer believed would determine the future of the automobile. But history was about to prove that the greatest competitive advantage wasn't horsepower, luxury, or even brand recognition. It was control over the technology hidden beneath the surface. By the end of the 2010s, the automotive industry had become a marvel of global cooperation. A single vehicle represented the work of thousands of companies scattered across dozens of countries. One supplier produced semiconductors. Another manufactured electric motors. Others specialized in batteries, software, glass, lighting systems, electronics, and countless other components. For decades, this model worked remarkably well. Manufacturers focused on designing and assembling vehicles, while an immense network of specialized suppliers delivered the parts needed to keep production moving. It was efficient. It reduced costs. And it allowed companies to concentrate on what they did best. But every strength has a hidden weakness. The more interconnected the system became, the more vulnerable it became to disruption. A delay at one supplier could halt an entire production line. A shortage of one critical component could stop thousands of vehicles from reaching customers. For years, those risks remained largely theoretical. Then the world changed. The COVID-19 pandemic disrupted global manufacturing on an unprecedented scale. Factories shut down. Shipping routes slowed. Ports became congested. Supply chains that had taken decades to build suddenly began breaking apart. Perhaps no shortage proved more damaging than semiconductors. Modern vehicles depend on hundreds, even thousands, of computer chips controlling everything from braking systems and battery management to navigation and entertainment. When chip supplies collapsed, assembly lines across the world slowed or stopped altogether. Some of the industry's largest manufacturers were forced to cut production. Others delivered vehicles missing certain electronic features, promising customers updates later. The crisis exposed a harsh reality. Many of the world's most successful automakers no longer controlled the technologies their businesses depended upon. BYD found itself in a very different position. Years earlier, while competitors expanded their dependence on outside suppliers, BYD had invested heavily in developing many critical technologies internally. It manufactured batteries. It developed electric motors. It invested in semiconductor production. It designed power electronics. It built software tailored specifically for its own vehicles. The strategy had once been criticized as unnecessarily expensive. Now it looked remarkably forward-thinking. When supply chains tightened, BYD possessed greater control over many of the components that determined whether production continued or stopped. It did not eliminate every challenge. No manufacturer escaped the global disruption completely. But the company entered the crisis with advantages many competitors simply did not possess. What once appeared to be excessive self-reliance suddenly became one of its greatest strengths. Yet Wang Chuanfu understood that controlling production alone would not guarantee long-term success. To compete globally, BYD also needed technology capable of changing how consumers viewed electric vehicles themselves. One obstacle continued discouraging potential buyers: battery safety. High-profile fires involving lithium-ion batteries had created understandable concerns among consumers. Others worried about battery lifespan. Would expensive battery packs need replacing after only a few years? Would performance decline rapidly? Could electric vehicles truly match the reliability people expected from conventional automobiles? Rather than treating these concerns as marketing problems, BYD approached them as engineering challenges. Years of research led the company toward a different battery chemistry, lithium iron phosphate, commonly known as LFP. Although this chemistry had existed for years, many manufacturers favored alternatives offering higher energy density. BYD believed the trade-off deserved another look. Its engineers focused on improving battery design, durability, and thermal safety. The result became known as the Blade battery. Its long, narrow cell design allowed batteries to be packed more efficiently while improving structural strength. Equally important, the chemistry reduced the risk of thermal runaway compared with many conventional lithium-ion battery designs. The Blade battery quickly became one of BYD's defining technologies. It offered a combination of safety, durability, and competitive manufacturing costs that strengthened the company's position in an increasingly crowded market. For consumers, it represented confidence. For competitors, it represented another warning. The gap was narrowing. In some areas, it was beginning to disappear. Yet Wang's strategy extended beyond battery technology. While much of the global conversation focused almost entirely on fully electric vehicles, BYD pursued another path many Western analysts initially underestimated: plug-in hybrid vehicles. To some critics, hybrids appeared to be little more than a temporary compromise. Neither fully electric, nor entirely gasoline-powered. But Wang viewed the market differently. He understood that millions of drivers still faced practical limitations. Charging infrastructure remained uneven. Long-distance travel presented challenges. Consumer habits varied dramatically from one country to another. For many buyers, plug-in hybrids offered a practical transition rather than demanding an immediate leap to full electrification. That decision proved especially significant within China, where infrastructure developed rapidly but remained uneven across regions. Instead of forcing consumers to choose between old technology and new technology, BYD offered both. The strategy broadened its customer base and accelerated production volume. Greater production reduced manufacturing costs. Lower costs made vehicles increasingly competitive. And higher sales generated additional resources for further research and expansion. The cycle reinforced itself. While competitors debated which technology would ultimately dominate, BYD focused on building vehicles customers were ready to buy. By the early 2020s, the results became increasingly difficult to ignore. Production expanded at extraordinary speed. Sales climbed across domestic and international markets. Factories multiplied. Investment accelerated. Even companies that had once dismissed BYD began paying closer attention. Some industry observers noticed something almost unimaginable. Manufacturers that had previously questioned BYD's capabilities were now evaluating its battery technology for their own vehicles. It marked a remarkable reversal. A company once viewed primarily as a battery producer had become one of the industry's most influential technology developers. The balance of competition was changing, but rapid expansion brings new challenges. The faster a company grows, the greater the pressure to sustain that momentum. Questions that had once focused on whether BYD could succeed were beginning to change. Now investors, competitors, and governments were asking something entirely different. How long could this extraordinary rise continue, and what hidden risks might still lie beneath one of the world's fastest-growing industrial success stories? The questions were no longer about whether BYD could succeed. Those had already been answered. The real question had become something far more consequential. What happens after you change an industry? Because becoming one of the world's fastest-growing automakers was only the beginning. Remaining there would prove to be an entirely different challenge. Every factory built, every new market entered, every vehicle sold, brought new opportunities. But it also created new rivals. Governments took notice. Competitors accelerated their investments. Trade barriers began rising. And what had started as a technological revolution was rapidly becoming a contest over economics, manufacturing, and geopolitical influence. The battle for the future of the automobile had entered a new phase. For much of the 20th century, the world's automotive map appeared firmly established. Germany represented engineering excellence. Japan became synonymous with reliability. The United States pioneered mass production on an unprecedented scale. Their influence shaped economies, defined industrial leadership, and set the standards by which every new competitor would be judged. Today, those foundations are being tested in ways few could have imagined. BYD is no longer simply another Chinese automaker. It has become one of the most closely watched industrial companies in the world. Its vehicles are reaching customers across Asia, Europe, Latin America, the Middle East, and an increasing number of emerging markets. New factories continue to rise. New partnerships continue to emerge. Each expansion represents more than commercial success. It reflects a broader shift in where innovation, manufacturing, and industrial influence are increasingly taking shape. Yet rapid success brings challenges just as formidable as those faced during a company's earliest years. Expanding into new markets means navigating different regulations, consumer expectations, safety standards, and political realities. In many countries, electric vehicles have become more than products. They have become symbols of economic competition. Governments are investing billions to strengthen domestic industries. Some have introduced tariffs and trade measures intended to protect local manufacturers from rapidly growing foreign competition. Others are encouraging new battery production, semiconductor manufacturing, and critical mineral supply chains within their own borders. The race is no longer limited to building better cars. It has become a contest over technology, energy, manufacturing, and national competitiveness. For traditional automakers, the pressure has never been greater. Companies that once measured product cycles in decades are now forced to innovate within years. Software updates have become as important as mechanical upgrades. Battery chemistry evolves almost as quickly as consumer electronics. Artificial intelligence is increasingly influencing everything from manufacturing efficiency to advanced driver assistance systems. The definition of an automobile is changing. It is becoming a rolling computer, an energy platform, and a connected digital device, all at once. That transformation has forced every manufacturer to reconsider long-held assumptions. Some have accelerated their electric vehicle strategies. Others continue investing in hybrids, recognizing that different regions may transition at different speeds. Many are redesigning factories, restructuring supply chains, and investing heavily in research to remain competitive. The competition has become global. But even as new technologies reshape the industry, one truth remains unchanged. No company is guaranteed permanent leadership. The same history that elevated one generation of industrial giants has repeatedly shown how quickly fortunes can change. Innovation creates opportunity. Success attracts competition. Every breakthrough becomes tomorrow's benchmark. BYD understands this reality perhaps better than most. The company that once challenged established leaders now faces challengers of its own. Emerging manufacturers are investing aggressively. Battery technologies continue evolving. Solid-state batteries, new charging solutions, autonomous driving systems, and next-generation manufacturing techniques promise to reshape the industry yet again. The pace of change is accelerating. What appears revolutionary today may become ordinary tomorrow. That is the nature of technological progress. Yet regardless of what comes next, one achievement is already beyond dispute. BYD changed the global conversation. It demonstrated that a company once dismissed as an unlikely competitor could challenge some of the most experienced manufacturers in automotive history. It proved that expertise in one technology could redefine an entirely different industry. And it reminded the world that the greatest disruptions often emerge from places few people are watching. Perhaps the most remarkable lesson extends far beyond automobiles. History is filled with industries that believed experience alone guaranteed the future. Again and again, they discovered that experience is invaluable, but only when combined with the willingness to adapt. Those who recognize change early often shape the future. Those who ignore it are eventually forced to respond to it. Whether BYD remains the dominant force of the electric era is a question only time can answer. Competition will intensify. Markets will evolve. New breakthroughs will emerge. The next great challenger may already be building the technology that will transform transportation once again. History has never favored those who believed they had already reached the summit. Every great empire, every dominant industry, and every company that once seemed untouchable eventually faced a challenger no one expected. For more than a century, the automotive world believed its future belonged to the same familiar names. Then, from a modest battery company in Shenzhen, a different vision emerged, one that forced an entire industry to rethink what the automobile could become. Whether BYD ultimately becomes the defining automotive company of the 21st century, or whether another innovator eventually surpasses it, remains a story that has yet to be written. But one truth is already impossible to ignore. The global automotive industry has changed. The rules have changed. And perhaps most importantly, the balance of industrial power has begun to change. Because this story was never just about electric vehicles. It was about vision defeating convention. It was about an engineer who saw opportunity where others saw impossibility. It was about proving that the next industrial revolution doesn't always begin inside the world's largest corporations. Sometimes, it begins in a workshop. Sometimes, it begins with a single idea. And sometimes, it begins with one person willing to believe in a future that no one else can yet imagine. History will decide where BYD's journey ultimately leads. But one chapter has already been written. The company that was once dismissed as an outsider has forced the world's oldest automakers into the most important race of their existence. And if one battery company could rewrite the future of an industry that had stood unchallenged for more than a century, then perhaps the next revolution has already begun, somewhere in the world, hidden in plain sight. The only question is, will we recognize it before history changes once again, or only after the future has already arrived?